Namaskar, hello and welcome viewers. You're watching Perspective with your host Kriti Mishra. North Korea has passed a law officially declaring it a nuclear weapon state, a status that leader Kim Jong Un said is irreversible and that there would be no negotiations. He stressed his country will never abandon the nuclear weapons it needs to counter the US, which he accused of pushing to weaken the North's defenses and eventually collapse his government. He made the comments during a speech at North Korea's rubber stamp parliament, where members passed the legislation. The law included a provision that requires North Korea's military to automatically execute nuclear strikes against enemy forces if its leadership comes under attack. A blitz of North Korean weapon tests since January included the firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile at full range for the first time since 2017. Washington and South Korean officials have repeatedly warned that the North is preparing to carry out what would be its seventh nuclear test. And to understand the implications of this announcement, I'm joined by an illustrious panel of guests. Joining us through virtual platform, Mr. Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador and distinguished fellow, Vivekanand International Foundation. Also joining us through virtual platform, Mr. Ajay Lele, senior fellow, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. And in the studio, we have with us Mr. Sandeep Kumar Mishra, associate professor, Center for East Asian Studies, JNU. I welcome all of you on Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us. And Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. I'm just quoting Kim Jong Un here. The utmost significance of legislating nuclear weapons policy is to draw an irretrievable line so that there can be no bargaining over our nuclear weapons, unquote. How do you read the statement made in North Korea's Supreme People's Assembly by North Korean Supreme Leader?
Well, Kriti, as you know that until now, the discussions have been on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. There have been talks during President Trump's time, which ended in 2017, on those lines. But then the Kim Jong Un and the leadership there actually thought that nothing is going to come out. And today they have also seen what is happening in the Russia-Ukraine war. And they understand its implications. That these sanctions will continue, nothing is going to change. So they want to basically start from the position of power. And this is very peculiar, as you must have seen and you also mentioned, that apart from the strategic target, it includes any attack on the leader. So it could be, that is something very peculiar. No other country this way lays out its policy of first use. But what they are trying to do is they are trying to have a possibility of a preemptive nuclear strike,
yes,
which adds a greater instability and a problem in the region. And I think that this has also happened at this time, particularly because of what is happening between US and Russia in the context of Ukraine or the war, and what is happening between US and China. These two countries have been part of the six-party talks, and they have been trying to dissuade North Korea not to go fully nuclear to that extent, it's a nuclear state, but it has declared itself to be a nuclear state, and now the negotiations are going to be how to manage it rather than how to denuclearize. So that is the basic change in my view.
So you talked about the timing of this particular move that we saw in North Korea. Of course, we'll talk about the geopolitical significance, but before that, Mr. Lele, Kim has made increasingly provocative threats of nuclear conflict towards the US and its allies in Asia, also warning that the North would proactively use its nuclear weapons when threatened. Do you think his latest comments underscore the growing animosity in the region as he accelerates the expansion of his nuclear weapons and missiles program?
Definitely. If you see during Trump's administration around 2019, there were a certain amount of efforts to engage North Korea diplomatically and in a constructive fashion. Particularly the South Korean leadership at that point in time, President Moon Jae-in, was very much in tune with engaging North Korea and trying to resolve the issue. But it so happened that you had a fiasco in Singapore and nothing moved forward. There was a significant amount of a pressure on Trump, probably from his disarmament ayatollahs, to take the next move over there. At that point in time, there was a certain amount of a thinking that there is a possibility that if you engage North Korea in a very high diplomatic fashion, there could be a possibility that North Korea at least will start talking of a denuclearization. North Korea had made a certain amount of attempts previously also by destroying their launch facility and all that, just to tell the rest of the world that yes, they are keen to do that. But subsequently, it so happened that after Joe Biden came in, you had COVID crisis also. You had change in administration in South Korea also. The present South Korean administration is not very proactive as far as engagement of North Korea is concerned, but they have got a certain other point of view. So under these circumstances, it appears that the president of North Korea found totally boxed in, and he had no other option but to show his teeth. And presently, because of the challenges which the entire world is facing because of Russia and Ukraine with challenges, and one must understand that North Korea is sharing borders with Russia and China. So there is a good amount of a case for North Korea just to do certain amount of pressure tactics and tell to the rest of the world that please don't take us lightly. And he has gone during last, say, 1 and 2 years in a very systematic fashion. There are a lot of missile testings which have happened. Almost now various channels have identified based on the satellite imagery that there is a possibility of the 7th nuclear test also likely to happen. So it's not there is a method in madness as far as North Korea is concerned. And he has now taken a very, what you can say, offensive position, because there is another element to it. North Korean leadership understands the fate made by Colonel Gaddafi of Libya and what happened to Saddam Hussein. They fully understand that nuclear weapons are the weapons for the bargain. And if they give up nuclear weapons, definitely there could be certain amount of attempts to eradicate the leadership. And that's why they have made a mention that it's not only the country, even if a leader is threatened, that they will go nuclear. So there is a very systematic attempt to engage the world in such a fashion that please look at us, otherwise we can go nuts.
Oh, perfect, sir. I'll just borrow your statement there. And Mr. Mishra, as Mr. Lele said, please ensure that, or please take care that we are there. As he said, pressure tactics or actual threat. In your opinion, what exactly is it?
I think it's both. And overall, actually, if we have to see a slightly longer picture of North Korean nuclear law, actually 2012 itself, North Korea, when they revised their constitution, in preamble they mention about nuclear state. So they mentioned officially, claimed themselves to be nuclear state in 2012. 2013, they had a similar law in which they talked about how they are going to use that nuclear weapons. And this year also, on 8th of August, actually today's establishment, foundation day of North Korea. So 74 years back, in 1948, they were established. So probably they have 2-3 objectives through this act. One actually is basically they want to legitimize their nuclear weapons. In the sense, they want to reach up to a point from which actually there could not be reversal of their nuclear program. So for that, they want to put it into constitution, they want to make different laws, they want to have all the declaration. So that's one purpose, to legitimize their nuclear weapons and saying that, look, this is non-negotiable. The second objective could be that, look, North Korea, I think they have been also very clear that nuclear weapons are basically they are basically bargaining tools. At the same time, they are deterrence, instrument of deterrence. So actually, in this, if you read the whole statement, whole lecture of, I read it on Uri Minju Kiri and Nodong Senmun. I can read Korean also. So actually, he said that, look, this is meant for preventing any misunderstanding and misuse of rival countries. So basically, he is trying to say that, look, our position is clear. We can preemptively use our nuclear weapons. So be clear that we are not going to be, and because 2013 law, it was talking about preventing any nuclear attack on North Korea. But this time they are saying that, no, we can preemptively strike on our rival countries. So I think, so make it clear, that could be the second objective. And the third objective, as I think Ambassador mentioned and Mr. Ajay Lele also mentioned, actually in the bargaining, you can say the regional equations. When you look at Biden administration, we look at Yoon Suk-yeol administration in South Korea, both these administrations, they have been not putting enough attention, according to North Korean perspective, enough attention to North Korean demands. And that's why, to draw their attention, actually Yoon Suk-yeol,
Yes.
the current South Korean president,
Yes.
he mentioned actually during his presidential campaign, he mentioned that he could borrow more tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. He also basically said that we are going to have more THAAD batteries on North Korea.
Right.
Actually, he even went to the extent saying that if there is any chance of North Korean nuclear attack, we are going to preemptively attack North Korean nuclear installation. That was the statement of South Korean. So I think in all these contexts, in a negotiation, North Korea wants to strengthen its position. So these could be 3-4 important objectives,
Right.
which they have been trying to achieve. But on the ground, I think it's not a big difference, because earlier also, in fact, in de facto, all those things were there. They are trying to make it de jure.
All right, so as you said that it could be instrument of deterrence. But where do we stand in all of this? Ambassador Trigunayat, India remains concerned about the proliferation of nuclear and missile technologies, which has adversely impacted her national security. Your assessment of India's policy towards the North Korean nuclear weapons program, given the latest development?
Well, as you know, that India has been engaged throughout with both the Koreas, and has been propagating for a peaceful coexistence between the two. And in 1953, as you know, we were there, very much part of this demarcation business between the two Koreas. But at the same time, of course, the problem with North Korea's nuclear program or not being a part of the NPT, as you know, there are 4 countries which have not been part of the NPT, have independently developed their nuclear program, in which India is also one of them, Pakistan, Israel, and of course, North Korea. Now, to that extent, it is there. But at the same time, the problem has been that we have seen that the nexus between or the passage of clandestine manner of some technologies to Pakistan or some other countries is what has been a major concern for India as far as this proliferation is that concerned. And of course, now we see that the whole effort to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula is virtually over. Now they have declared themselves to be a nuclear state, and as was mentioned by the professor, the South Koreans have been trying to come into the American umbrella. So the situation would become far more graver in the region, and which will not be good for us, because North Korea still continues to be under the overall ambit of China. As I say, that because of the China and Pakistan angle, there is a greater problem.
Absolutely, there is a greater problem. But since we are also talking about South Korea here, Mr. Lele, the North Korean report about Kim's speech came a day after South Korea extended its latest olive branch, proposing a meeting with North Korea to resume temporary reunions of aging relatives separated by the 1950 Korean War, which were last held probably in 2018. But the jury is divided on whether North Korea would accept the offer, considering the stark deterioration in the inter-Korean ties. What is your take on this?
You see, if you see the Korean politics, there was a liaison office which was built, which got destroyed by North Korea. Then you had certain amount of North Korean employees who used to go to South Korea to work and earn certain amount of money. There was certain amount of arrangements which were done, but all those arrangements no longer exist. The present dispensation of Korea is playing it very smartly, in a sense that they are giving indications to North Korea that we are not as soft as Moon Jae-in. But whether their smartness is actually beneficial to them or not, one has to only time can tell it. Because if you see the actions of South Korea has given a so-called olive branch by saying that we will give you food supplies, we will give you energy supplies, we will help you towards developing infrastructure if you give up nuclear weapons. I think that's a very naive way of telling a country like North Korea that we will give you food if you give up nuclear weapons, because that country has survived for all these years in spite of all those sorts of restrictions which have been put on it. There is a certain amount of element. I read somewhere recently, there was a news that even now Russia is purchasing arms from North Korea.
Right.
So it's not that North Korea is totally boxed in. It shares borders with both China and Russia, and they have a certain amount of leverages over there. Now, what present administration of South Korea is doing? A couple of years back, there used to be a policy of sending balloons towards the North Korea, which will distribute the leaflets and all that. Idea was to create certain amount of a propaganda. Previous administration of South Korea had stopped this, but it has restarted again. And North Korea is of a firm opinion that South Korea has actually transported the COVID-19 by using this balloon technology.
Yes.
And the sister of North Korean premium has got actually used very, very difficult words to explain the situation. So under present circumstances, it appears that there is a very less possibility of using South Korea as a tool for engagement, because US has not taken any position yet. I think based on what North Korean premier has said, how they are going to look at the nuclear weapons. Because you see, all said and done, everybody understood that North Korea is not going to hold nuclear weapons just for the heck of it. They are definitely going to do a very what can say threatening posture of they having nuclear weapons with them. Because over a period of time, North Korea is developing their missile arsenal also. If you look at their missile capabilities also, recently they have tested certain missiles. They got a missiles, ICBMs capable of reaching New York, also onto the continental of United States also, most part of it. It has got a capacity of reaching 8,000 kilometers to 13 to 15,000 kilometers range also. They have made a certain amount of investments into satellite technologies also. This is very interesting. On end of February and early March, they have tested missiles, and the point of view which was expressed by North Korea that they are going to invest into reconnaissance satellites. Now, these reconnaissance satellites are actually for monitoring the incoming threat, at the same time helping their nuclear arsenal to pinpoint a target also. So if you see, North Korea's investments into the technology is not just one of the things. They are doing a very systematic investment into technology. And I think that's what the US and South Korea and Japan needs to take very seriously.
Absolutely, sir. And since we're also talking about geopolitical implications, and Ambassador, you mentioned about it, there are concerns over North Korea's fortified cooperation with China and Russia aimed at undercutting US influence. Now, North Korea has repeatedly blamed the United States for the crisis in Ukraine, saying the West's hegemonic policy justified Russian military actions in Ukraine to protect itself. We're talking about this new world order, post the war, post-COVID. How do you view the geopolitical implications of the latest North Korean law?
Well, at the moment, the world is far too busy with what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening post-pandemic, what is happening in China, or what is China's response. I think the timing of this upgradation of their 2013 doctrine has something to do with what is happening in their neighborhood. That is what is happening between China and the US. And I think that so far, China and Russia have been trying to keep Kim Jong Un in a bit of a check and probably using him as a lever. But now that they know that they are also in a major, they are also having problems, both of them, and the world is, as you mentioned, is going through a transitional phase. And we are looking at a new world order where Cold War 2.0 will be a reality. And then Russia, China led one side and the West on the other side. Of course, the winters are still there in between. So North Korea obviously is going to play a greater role. And we have seen what happened recently in the Eastern European Economic Forum, which was there in Far East of Russia, which was held just currently being held actually. And North Koreans were very much. So we are looking at this possibility. I think that I would not be surprised if there was some kind of a cue from the Chinese to this end, and that this happened, that Kim Jong Un announced it today. Of course, today is an important day for us. But this is more of messaging to the West that don't mess up with us, because the regime in South Korea has also changed. They are no longer Kim Jong Un, who used to be soft, and generally that party has been very keen on developing ties and trying to do that. But it has always been a problem to reach, and it will not be an easy thing. Now, of course, only saving grace here is that in the doctrine, they have mentioned that they will not attack in non-nuclear cities.
Yes.
Now, that is, of course, a matter of judgment at one given time. But then that does not really save South Korea, that has been following this kill chain kind of philosophy, whereby importing nuclear weapons or the operationalization of those weapons from its territory. So it very much becomes a target. So in my view, the situation in the northeastern Asia is also continuing to remain far more unstable.
We're talking about this instability, Mr. Mishra. Now, we've seen United Nations Security Council repeatedly passing resolutions, imposing sanctions, but clearly to no avail. Now, going ahead, the fear, as Ambassador Trigunayat also mentioned, that there's instability, there's fear. What are the measures to avert any kind of strike? Because there's already a chaos if we look around throughout the world.
It's a very pertinent question, but I think difficult to answer. I think, but I think at least I can say one thing, that this idea that you can isolate North Korea, put sanctions on North Korea, and it's going to pay, this has been actually overstretched in my mind. Because, the way North Korea is already isolated, North Korea's overall foreign trade, overall it's less than actually 7-8 billion US dollar per annum. And 80-90% of that trade happens only with China.
Yes.
So you can't isolate a country which is already isolated. Two, it's a totalitarian country, it's an authoritarian country. So even if people suffer in North Korea, the regime and political and military elites of North Korea, they are not going to have enough stress in any kind of sanctions put by international community. And thirdly, I will say that the idea that you can squeeze North Korea is based on, like, you can isolate fully North Korea, but 100% isolation is not possible.
True.
Actually, there are going to be leakages via China, via Russia, via some other, you can say, non-state actors. So because of all these things, I think this sanction part is not going to help. And I would say that engagement, talking to North Korea, having some kind, I'm not saying that this is a perfect solution, but I think in all the imperfect solutions, this appears to be, and I can remind you one thing, that when they were talking, 2017, a new president, Moon Jae-in, came to South Korea, and he started engagement policy. And from 2016 to 2019, almost 2 years, North Korea did not have a single missile test. And 2017, last they had nuclear test, and the next nuclear test hasn't happened yet. So I'm saying that engagement do work, and we need to, whatever problems are there, we need to rectify, we need to create some kind of, but at the same time, this idea that you can isolate North Korea, put sanction on North Korea, it has failed till now, and
Yes.
it's not going to work even in future.
All right, let's get in Mr. Lely's perspective on that. So as Mr. Mishra says that isolation sanctions would not work, perhaps engagement will. How do you take that?
I entirely agree with him, because you see, if you take a maximalist position and say that come tomorrow and North Korea will give up nuclear weapons, it's just not possible. As it was rightly pointed out, that if you engage North Korea, they don't misbehave. Particularly during last 2 to 3 years time, when the engagement was there, North Korea was at least trying to engage themselves. He had sent his sister to attend Olympic Games and all that. At least some sort of a positiveness was there. But right now, what happened was that maybe because of a COVID crisis, change of administration in the US, North Korea totally got isolated. At the end of the day, we all understand that the sanctions actually don't work. But there are certain amount of implications of the sanctions also. If you take the case of Iran also started talking, because they also understand that somewhere down the line, sanctions do pinch. And today also, why North Korea is saying that, please look at us, please talk to us. Otherwise, we will invest into all these types of deadly arsenal. Basically, because they have got certain amount of fear that over a period of time, if the sanctions continue, it will be difficult for the political leadership, be it totalitarian, to continue running the country the way it has been run today. So the issue of North Korea needs to be handled carefully. You just can't isolate North Korea and expect that these people will keep quiet. True. I think the indication which the North Korean leadership is giving is that we are not going to keep quiet if you're going to isolate us fully. So now the onus is on countries like China, US, Japan, to an extent Russia also, and China, to ensure that the positive engagement of the country is undertaken. Because if you totally isolate them, I think then they may not have any other option but keep on testing missiles. And if you really ask me how long they can keep on testing missiles, because last 3 years they are doing it. They have done enough amount of tests, given enough amount of indications. They have even tested hypersonic missiles. So they have proved their capability. And if they feel that even by proving their capability, nothing is happening, then you never know. Because at the end of the day, the political leadership in North Korea is not a sensible leadership per se. So I'm not saying that they will follow a nuclear path, but one should ensure that they are not being pushed towards that end.
Right, sir. And as you said, handle with care. That's going to be the key. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Trigunayat, Mr. Ajay Lele, and Mr. Mishra. Well, viewers, that's all we have for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Namaskar.